Hello and welcome to Atlantic Debrief, the Atlantic Council Europe Center internet show and podcast on the most pressing issues impacting transatlantic relations today. My name is Jörn Fleck. I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council, and it's my pleasure today to be joined by Gérard Araud, a distinguished fellow with the Europe Center and the former French ambassador to the United States, as well as a longtime France explainer. Ambassador Araud, a real pleasure to have you back on the show.
Good afternoon. Hi.
You joined us just prior to the first round of the French parliamentary elections to set the scene and lay out the stakes of these elections. Now we have the results of the first round in the legislative elections from Sunday, June 30th. We still have a second round in the elections to come on July 7th, but we've seen a strong performance on the far right from the National Rally, led by Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, with 33% of the vote, followed by the left-wing alliance of the New Popular Front, with around 28%, trailed only in third place by President Macron's Ensemble with 20%. So it appears that President Macron's gamble to call snap elections has failed and perhaps backfired, but there's a lot more to unpack here. And so I wanted to jump right in with Ambassador Araud, and maybe, Ambassador, you can give us your key takeaways from the first round that you've watched closely that maybe surprised you or didn't surprise you, and what the key top-line takeaways are for you from this first round of the French parliamentary elections.
No, unfortunately, the results are not surprising. You know, all the polls have been announcing that it will be a success for the far right and it will be a defeat for the centrist presidential party. And it's an unmitigated disaster for the president, who called in a very unexpected way the snap elections, since his party is only the third one, as you said, and since now we are heading to a possible far-right government. Actually, we will know better tomorrow, because tomorrow night all parties should have really given the names of their candidates. And in the second round, you know, you are allowed to run only if you have had more than 12% of the votes on the first round, which means that in a lot of cases, you have three candidates, one of the far right, one of the far left or in the left, and one for the presidential party. So the question will be whether against the far right, the left and the center are going, you know, really to unite so that their own candidate the third one gives up to prevent the far right from winning. So it's really right now you have frantic negotiations between parties, but also between candidates themselves. Some centrists are reluctant actually to give up for some far left candidates. Actually, the Gaza crisis has had was very divisive, because the far left was aligned with the Hamas, and while of course the traditional left and the center were more nuanced and considered that this support was at some moment verging on anti-Semitism. So we are in a complicated moment, but it's very likely that there will be a lot, actually, at the end of the day, of duel between the far right and, in a majority of the case, the left, and in the minority of the case, centrist. But having said that, right now, if you look at the first round, and again, everything is not everything, but a lot of things are possible between the two rounds. Actually, the far right has a pretty good chance to be able to have a majority with the conservatives, because the traditional conservatives, who got nearly 10%, actually are showing more and more that they are ready to work with the far right. And the tradition, the conservative newspaper, Le Figaro, has really announced today that he considered that the far left was much more dangerous than the far right. And conservative politicians, traditional conservative politicians, have really obviously been repeating all the day yesterday that the far left was the danger, which was a way of implying it was not the far right. So a coalition of the traditional conservative and far right is not impossible on Sunday night. The other really, and in hypothetical terms, you have, I should say, 50% chance of having a far right and conservatives majority, and 40% an assembly without a majority, which would be quite chaotic. But in both cases, I should say, even if they are quite different, in both cases, it means that France is entering a crisis. Because even if we have a far-right conservative majority, it means first that it will be the far-right, so it will be controversial, and we can't exclude riots, strikes, and so on. And let's not forget that we have in 3 weeks, we have the Olympic Games. And sooner or later, there will be a confrontation between the president and the government. First, it will be a sort of skirmishes, everyone trying to paralyze the other one. And after that, there will be sooner or later a major confrontation and maybe new elections. We can't have new elections before next June. And if there is no majority, it will be, in a sense, maybe worse. But in any case, you have to look at France as a country in crisis, which is going to be self-centered in the coming months, and largely out of the international scene, whatever Macron will try to pretend.
That's a lot you put on the table there already, the review and the preview in many ways. I want to unpack that a little bit. We'll come back to the two scenarios you outlined. But first, I wanted to quickly ask about this 1 week space of building or maintaining what has traditionally been this so-called Republican front, right? To do some tactical voting and withdrawals of candidates. What do you see as the probability of at least Macron and the left agreeing, let alone the center-right Republicans, on these tactical withdrawals of third candidates in order to contain the National Front? Does that have any promise of success?
So unfortunately, one lesson of this vote with the far right gaining 32% means that what we call Republican front or in French, the Republican barrage dam has collapsed. Basically, a lot of voters consider that the far right is not a danger, that the far right is not a different party, and after all, they can try with this party. In a sense, it has become for a lot of people respectable, quote unquote. So it means, and on the other side, as I've said, we have had difficult last 6 months around this issue of anti-Semitism. Really, the far left, as I have said, in its support of Gaza, has gone really very far beyond criticizing Israel, to the point of really being considered by 91% of the French Jews as anti-Semitic. So it means that now, when really everybody is looking at who is really staying, who is running, and who is giving up, there are some members of the far left that I think are not palatable for the center. So I think in the majority of cases, we are going to have what you call a Republican front. But there will be, I guess, a few cases where the center will refuse to vote for the far left or to give up for the far left. But even if there is a a Republican front, as I was saying, for maybe for a majority of the French, or for a lot of French now, the National Rally, the far-right party, has become respectable, acceptable, and all the more because some conservatives have announced, even before the elections, that they were ready to work with them.
Before we get to the outlook again, the look ahead, maybe can you explain, we saw some record turnout for parliamentary elections, right? Between 67, 70% even over decades, a record. What has driven voters to that level of alienation from the president and his party, and towards, for our international viewers, maybe just some of the
I think I think there is this element of nobody understands why there were these snap elections. And, in a sense, the power that the president has to call snap elections, it's considered a bit like a nuclear deterrence. It's a no-use weapon. It's something extreme, in extreme cases, to try to solve a crisis. Really, we had it several times, but it was because the government was toppled down, or because there was the May 68 crisis. And suddenly, out of the blue, after European elections, which were, of course, were a defeat for the president, but we didn't change anything, suddenly you have these snap elections called and a very short campaign, electoral campaign, the shortest, which was constitutionally possible, of 3 weeks. So there is a lot of French, really frankly, who said that it was crazy. Really, it didn't make sense. And on the top of that, the president has, even if we re-elected him, has never been very, I should say, popular, but people don't love him. He has a problem of relating with the men in the street. There is something, I should say, common between Obama and Macron. They are aloof, they are intellectual, they are slim, they are elegant. But, really, the men in the street can't consider that they are basically having the same taste or really relating to each other. So Macron is seen by a lot of people as arrogant, out of touch. Again, there has never been a love towards his person, and really, and on the top of that, you had suddenly you had this election. The fact is also that Macron, in a surprising way, has never been able to build a party. He's a lonely guy. Basically, he's the man who is making himself, and he doesn't care about a political party. So, really, I would be hardly able to tell you the name of the presidential party because it has been changing every 6 months, really, which is a good signal of the inability to build a real political basis. And on the top of that, he didn't forecast that in the case of such a strong far right, immediately the left would be united against the far right, because in the French history there is really it's a strong element, and that the presidential party will be blocked, trapped, crushed between the leftist art rock and the rightist art place.
Turning our heads towards a look ahead, the second round is on July 7th, this coming Sunday. You already said that the two most likely scenarios are either an absolute majority for the national rally with support most likely from the Republicans, from the center-right forces, or just a hung parliament without any clear majorities. What does that mean for France's role in Europe, at the EU level and internationally?
Let's look at the first, because in a sense, in the case of the later, it's difficult to have any commentary, because what really, it will be totally a new ground. We have never known such a situation, a totally hung parliament. Maybe you could have a government of technicians, but which could do nothing basically because there is no majority in the parliament. So France, in a sense, France will vanish from the international scene, I guess. If you have a far-right and conservative government, it's a situation where basically you have two enemies facing each other. But, and it's an important but, the public opinion loves it. Because they love it, they see it as a sort of national unity. Really saying, oh, okay, everybody is there, so they have to work together. Which means that the president and the government, in a sense, should keep smiling, should be seen as working together. And so there will be a sort of very hypocritical situation where you are going to give, really the blows that you are going to give will be under the table. And so that will be, and the first one who shoots has lost. So in this case, I don't think that the far-right, the government, would have an interest to make a fuss in foreign relations. Because in foreign relations, the president has a sort of legitimacy. Nevertheless, there will be certainly a few three issues, I should say, where the government will have to show that it exists. First, on Ukraine. On Ukraine, basically, they don't say they are pro-Russian anymore, but they say they are pro-peace. And considering the reaction of the public opinion, I think they will feel entitled to say, no, we don't send trainers or French soldiers on Ukrainian territory, and we don't send planes, since the president had just announced that we would send a Mirage 2000. I think they will say that. And in a sense, it means that France would lose, in a sense, the leadership that Macron has taken, really in the recent months. And there will be a sort of skirmish of what does it mean supporting Ukraine, and France will go really in the second line, really among Europeans, I should say, who would go rather closer to the Germans or the Italians. Second element, and here it's a bit out of our usual topics, but if the far right is acting, it would be on immigration, and it would be law and order, which means that we will have very difficult relationship with our former colonies, with Morocco, Algeria, and the African countries, because it's from this country that most of our migrants are coming. So there will be limitation of visa or expulsion. So I think there will be a crisis with these countries, which of course are not going to cave in. And and we have major interest there. So it will be that would be certainly a problem. And the main question mark, and not the main, but a big question mark, is the European Union. Because in European Union, they will have to make a stance. They will have to show that they are different. It's not Brexit, because Brexit in a sense, has killed Brexit. But really, they have announced how they want to reduce their financial contribution. They will want to. So there are a lot of several points, but at the same time, I'm not sure that these points they will implement their program. Really. So they will maybe make a fuss. But here, the question mark is, in France, we are saying they can go both ways. They can go Meloni ways, or they can go Salvini way, in terms of far right. And as you know, Meloni, in a sense, has become EU compatible. And I think Jordan Bardella, the potential prime minister, I guess will go this way. But Marine Le Pen, for the moment, is more on the Salvini side. And anyway, there would be a strange situation, because Bardella will be the prime minister, but Le Pen will be the candidate for the presidency. So it may really lead to some problems between both, because on one side Bardella will want to be a successful prime minister, and the other side Le Pen will want to get rid of Macron as soon as possible. But that's another point. So I don't think it will be a major crisis with the European Union, but we will become, I should say, a major pain in the functioning of the European Union. Well, a lot of people in Brussels, if they listen to me, say the French have always been a pain. But really, frankly, it will be we will be much more painful than and much less productive than we have been. But again, I don't think there will be there will be a lot of noises of slammed doors, but not a major crisis really putting in danger the functioning of our union.
Very interesting points on the dynamics within the national rally there too, and the standoff that you described. But can between President Macron and the national rally leadership, can they really smile along and avoid firing the first shot for very long, given that it's a 1 year period?
I think it's a good question, because I'm relying on the experience that we have had in the previous situation with different president and different majority. And it was the way the presidents behaved. Suddenly they became very presidential, very willy, and saying we are in charge of France. We really, and looking upon the dwarfs from their Olympus, presidential Olympus. And that was Mitterrand and Chirac were very good at it. And the government was obliged to kowtow in front of the president. The problem is, and that's I was discussing it with ministers who had the experience of the previous situation, previous cohabitation, and who know Macron. I think that unfortunately Macron is unable basically to shut up. And so I think that it could become more immediately immediately confrontational. That really, and so the dynamics of the situation, considering the very particular president that we have, could be more confrontational and could lead. A lot of people believe, frankly, that it means that in 1 year, in June, we will go again to elections if it is the situation. But again, as I have said in the beginning, it means whatever Macron will try to pretend out our borders, I'm sure that he will lecture the world as much as he was doing before. Actually, it will be a much weakened president, because you have to understand, Macron is not only weakened because of his party lost, but also because his party and people really are reproaching him to have led them to a disaster. There is very much in the center and in the center right, there is a post-Macron atmospherics. And during the campaign, you have seen a very spectacular way members of the majority who have been openly critical of the decision of Macron and saying that if by any chance they were winning, there will be a difference balance between the president and the government, which means at the expense of Macron.
Ambassador Araud, that's all we have time for right now. A fascinating assessment on the day after the first round of the French parliamentary elections of the uncharted territory and the many difficult dynamics that we'll have to continue to watch. Ambassador, we very much hope to have you back after the second round and have another look at what we're seeing then and the implications. Really appreciate today's really wide-ranging assessment from you. Thank you to our viewers for watching, and I hope you will continue to follow the Atlantic Council Europe Center's analysis and assessments of the French parliamentary elections and their implications for Europe and the transatlantic partnership. For now, thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye-bye.